thou hast brought here to this world the most joyous good news the world ever saw, and that our hearts can be light, and we can laugh, and we can love, and we can see everything beautiful because you came. We owe it all to you, O Christ. And we're very, very grateful, and we know thou art here laughing with us this afternoon, enjoying it all. And yet thou art very serious, and thou dost desire us now to know where to take hold of thy world, which is in great need of us, and of this good news that makes our hearts so full of joy. Now, speak to everybody here through my lips aloud and in the silence, and help us all to speak back to thee. Help us to be aware of thy presence. Thou art here among us. Jesus, stand among us in thy risen power. I would be glad to be erased from this picture, washed right out of here, if I could, so that we might all just hear thee. What wilt thou have us to do for our world? We've been learning how to pray. We have been learning how to promise. And the Lord's Prayer, a promised prayer, to help thee. And the time has come, I think, when we want to cease needing any more stimulation and get some information that will be able to put into practice right away. So now, use us who are going to talk in the way thou dost desire. In Jesus' dear name, amen. Well, several requests have come directly and indirectly to me, and I think they're right. One person said, I'm all steamed up to go now, where shall I go and what shall I do? And another said, tell us how we can, what we should do about our foreign mission program and how to do it. And so I think we're in the mood, those of us who have been here for these other sessions, not to get wimpy or excited or intense, because that can really be a disease if it ends only in emotion, but to do something about it. And that's what I believe the Lord wants me to talk about with you for a little while now. What shall we do about it? If any of you were present at the ministers' meeting the other day and hear me say something again I said then, I apologize. But I think I better say it again. The history of the world, I think, will be written to show that in 1945, it split right in two. The pre-1945 and the post-1945. We're not in the same planet we were then. It's all changed. And if I'm right about it, and I want to try to show that very quickly, what I mean, if I'm right about it, then everything we do has got to change. You can't compare the way the church has been going or the way the United States has been doing prior to 1945 with anything since. Because what would get by and at least enable us to survive and to prosper in this country might be wholly wrong now, and in fact it is wholly wrong. I hope that God will help me to make this so vivid that you'll never be able to forget it, what I shall say in the next 5 minutes. There have been a number of things that have been converging to make this a new world, and they all came together with a smash at the end of this World War. The first of these things was that we were no longer a lot of little worlds. We were becoming one world. Wendell Willkie wrote a book called One World, and some people saw that it was on the way then. If it was on the way then, it certainly is here now. It's a different world. We say that there are two worlds now, one behind the Iron Curtain and the other outside of it, and in one sense that's true. But nevertheless, the airplane has converted this into one world. An airplane arrived today or yesterday, which went all the way around the world without landing once, and got back to the place from which it started in 48 hours. Now that is a very good symbol of one reason why this is now no longer worlds, but a world. No longer communities, but one solid world. And that's only the beginning. In the realm of aviation, that is slow compared to what they're going to have. They're not only planes, but these horrible rockets. Right over in Chicago, that the biggest noise at the inauguration of the next of the president is going to be a rocket 40 feet high that can go from here to Russia in a matter of minutes and destroy any big city in Russia. It's a 40-foot high rocket. I hope to God that isn't the biggest noise in this inauguration, but it's a symbol of the new world. I think you might write to the president if you want to, and say, we hope this thing in the Chicago newspapers was false. We don't want anything military to be the biggest noise. We want prayer to be, as it was at the first inauguration. The fact that he prayed at the end of that inauguration was the great thing that went around the world, and you all loved. It ought to be that again. Not rockets, not planes, not bombs, not threats, but love and prayer. By the way, I'm going to give you a lot of things to do this afternoon, probably. That's number one, if you want to do it. You can write. I told you some things to write about this morning. Did you remember them? What was it? Huh? Yes. Write and ask why Congress doesn't pass a law forbidding advertising of liquor in all interstate magazines. They have a right to do that. Now, that's the number one reason why it's a new world. We're all tied together so close now. There are no longer any oceans, they're just mill ponds. It was just child's play, nothing to boast about at all. Hardly to mention that about the 18th or 17th of December, I went over to a prayer congress of CFO people over in London and stayed there for about 5 days and then came back again. It's just nothing. It only took about 13 hours each way, and it takes that long to come from, at least that long to come from New York here, doesn't it? Must take about 30 hours by train, and 13 hours across the Atlantic. Now the next thing that has changed the whole picture was the dropping of those two bombs on Japan. The beginning of what's called the atomic age. And the scientists, I've been in touch with so many of them in this last 6 months, the last 3 months especially. I told you about Arthur Compton and his group, but I could tell you about some more that come to mind now. The scientists all say we're just beginning to begin. We've broken into a new world and there's no end to it. And the threat to humanity is awful. Over here in New York City, they're scared at some maniac who's planting bombs. Frightened. We hear noises and wake up at night and think there must be a bomb going off. Well, the trouble with this awful thing is it isn't safe, not only with big nations, but with little nations and with little men. And we've got to make a world different. It's a new world we're in. Now, the third thing that has, there are many others, but the third thing that has now precipitated the new world, besides the bomb, besides the airplanes and the missiles, is the fall of China. Immediately after the Second World War, when Stalin and Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt were together at Yalta, and we thought that war had ended, another war just began. And this time it was a war with a different weapon that had never been used on a big scale before. We have a lot of names for it. Sometimes it's called subversion. That's the worst name. And then it's sometimes called propaganda, that's another name. And so on. It swept down through China. And the communists captured China in 4 years, right after the Second World War. It began in 45, ended in 49, it was all gone. And they never lost a Russian soldier in the whole of that campaign. Chinese fought, killed each other, but it was chiefly done with promises, lies. The communists went down there and captured that area, and that has opened our eyes to the realization that we're in a new world. We know why it was now. You remember how many people we blamed? Some of our very best friends, we were inclined to blame them for the fall of China and said if they had only gone over there and done differently, it wouldn't have fallen. It would, because that was too late. I don't think there's anything we could have done. I think we did about as well as we could have done at the time. Too late. I'll tell you why we know now why China fell. China fell because it was hungry, because it was destitute, because it was desperate. Well, you say, the world has always been hungry. Yes, it has, before and since the pyramids. But this is a new thing. This is on the way, too. While the sharp cleavage was right after the end of the World War, these things were on the way, in the making. The new thing was that 3/4 of the human race that always were supine, submissive, in despair, and therefore helpless, have changed their minds. They saw our soldiers during the war, and before and since that, they've seen our tourists. They've seen our automobiles, they've seen our homes, they've seen our clothes, they've seen our food, they've seen us, and they've heard what we believe. They know we aren't that way over here. Now that great mass of people say, we don't have to take it anymore. Now, I think I've just now told you the most important of all the factors that make a new world. The masses have changed their minds. The underdog will not stay under anymore. He's coming up two ways, one of two ways. He sees two ways. If he can come up the peaceful way, the know-how way, can earn his way up, he will. But if he can't, he'll blow up. That's the way they are over there, and nobody that you'll ever hear knows it better than I do, because they're my friends. I worked among them. Well, now that's the new situation that has come into the world, and here are some of the aspects of it. Our friends over here, these countries that are, we call our allies, on this side of the Iron Curtain, are different from us. Here in the United States, almost all of us, not quite, but all but a little fringe, we say 10%, 5%, are relatively prosperous. We have more things, everybody in this room has more things than any pharaoh of Egypt or any sultan ever had in history, because you can have everything. They couldn't have Frigidaire, they couldn't have all these other things that we have. We have more things, but over there, it's a little fringe at the top, 5% or less. They have these things. They're educated. The rest are illiterate. They have all the money. The rest have none. They have all the power. The rest have none. That's the way it is, that little fringe. They are our friends. The fringe is our friends. The masses know nothing about it much, excepting they are very unhappy. Now, this is what the new situation has brought about. Since China fell, and those governors over there have no illusions at all about why, they know that all the conditions that made China fall are down here too. They are just as hungry in India and all over South Asia as they were in China. They're just as hungry in Africa as they were in China, and in much of Latin America. And so these governments, I'm now speaking of the Eastern Hemisphere, these governments are governments, mind you, governors, Nehru, Nasser, all the others, the Shah of Iran, all the rest of them are afraid, not of Russia and not of China. That's the reason you're so surprised at the way they hobnob with them. They're afraid of their own masses. I'll give you a very good illustration of that. I was telling a group, I think just about yesterday, about this. They didn't seem to understand it at all. They say, why does Nehru act so funny? Or why is he such a difficult man to deal with? Well, I said, if you were in his situation, you do just what he does. They said, why did he hobnob with Khrushchev and Bulgana and bring them over there and show them such a wonderful time when they were down there in India? And then I told them why. And they said, well, that makes sense. That's exactly it. I don't know whether you know why or not. I'll tell you. In the election that took place at the same time that we had our election, India went uncomfortably near going communist. Some areas did. And it looked as though the next election, at the rate they were going, would all go communist. Nehru brought Khrushchev down there in Bulganan and treated him so well because he got both of those men to praise his party, the Congress Party. Both of those men neglected the communists when they were in India. And that very astute, smart politician outwitted those two men. And when the next elections took place, the people thought that they were, that Nehru was the man they would vote for, and they voted against communism. 80% of the people are totally illiterate. This is the way they vote. Not by a name, they can't read it. They have a cow. That's Nehru's party. They have a tree. That's another party. They have a sickle. And you know what that stands for? The Communist Party. And they would have voted for the sickle if Nehru had not brought those two men in there and got them to praising his party. Now, that was very astute. You see, he isn't afraid of Russia, and he isn't afraid of China. He's afraid of his own people. The same thing is true of Nasser. Why does he behave the way he does? Because Nasser, I think, is more interested in, and I really believe he loves more, the people of Egypt than any man since Joseph. At least he's frightened at them. They are restive. Those people up and down the Nile River, though, those masses are like the masses all over the world. Now, if I've given you a correct diagnosis, and I have, this is the situation now. If America does not help these masses who constitute 90% of the people of Asia and Africa up the peaceful way, if we don't reach out the hand of friendship, when they reach their hand up, they're going communist. And they're going to destroy their own governments. And then we'll lose all of the Eastern Hemisphere. That's the plain, clear situation. I hope I've made it as clear, so clear you can't forget it. And if that's correct, and nobody in Washington will deny it, and I don't think anybody in this room will deny it, if that's correct, then the answer is very clear. We must help those people if we want to save them from going communist, if we want to have not to have a hostile world against America. We find ourselves hated if we don't help them. We find ourselves loved if we do. It's that simple. Sometimes I use the illustration of John D. Rockefeller and the Rockefeller Foundation. I remember when I was a young man, they hated Rockefeller. They said he was a 10-cent millionaire. It got around among everybody that if you asked him for money, he'd give you a dime, and they hated him. I was one of them, but I don't anymore. He established the Rockefeller Foundation, and now his foundation is one of the most beloved institutions around the world. They use their money to bless the world, and everybody loves them. And America stands that way. She can be hated if the reputation gets around the world that she's this way. And she can be the most beloved country the world ever saw right now if she helps the world. Now, but what I want to point out to you is several things. We started a Point 4 program. The United States government did. And it's done well. I think Asia would be gone, and most of Africa, all of Africa gone, and much of Europe by this time, if we had not started that program. That's how much I value it. And yet it isn't enough. And one of the reasons it isn't enough is because in this new era, there's one part of the United States that doesn't know what it's about yet. They haven't awakened yet as much as they should, and that's the church. Glenn Harding is the head of the executive director of Koinonia. Koinonia is trying to find people with a Christian passion and technical skill and offer them to the government of the United States. Here is a big pamphlet. I don't know, 20, 25 pages, 30 pages of people they're seeking of all kinds, technical training. And those people in Washington City, whom we know so well, one of them told me when I was there alone with him, and I think he's told all of the people in Koinonia, frankly, we're disappointed in the church because it isn't furnishing the type of men that we need, who have both the technical training and the spiritual undergrounding. We want both, or they're not much good out there. They got to love their people, and they better love the Lord Jesus, or else they aren't much good abroad. And we don't have enough of them. Well, the President of the United States, on the 11th day of September this year, had together about 75 people in the White House, and one of them sitting here, John Peters. I don't ask him to tell this, but I'll tell first what I know about it. I've read everything he said, and one of the things that struck me most forcefully was this. The President knows that what I'm telling you this afternoon is tremendously and terribly true, that we've got to do more than we've done if we hope to save the Eastern Hemisphere from all going communist. We haven't done enough yet. And he said to these men, by the way, John Peters was asked to make his own explanation of what World Neighbors is. He said to these men, if we hope to save our civilization and our way of life from the encroachments of communism, people have got to do more. Private enterprise must, church must, and a people-to-people program to supplement what the government itself is able to do. Didn't he say that, John? And I know he said it because I read his speech. and so... What? And so he pled with us, and he's done that not only once. I was told it wasn't very far from here. I've forgotten where he did it. I know that down in Baylor University in Texas, he went down there and made the same kind of speech. We don't pay much attention to it. It doesn't get the headlines in the newspapers. Other things do, that doesn't. Yet he understands that what I'm telling you is true. Now, that's the urgency, the emergency, the crisis of the situation. But there's another aspect to this. If we're looking for opportunity to save the world, and not only to save the world, but to win the world, for the Lord Jesus Christ, it offers a new opportunity. It offers it to the church. Now, by the way, the Presbyterians have just launched something. I'm not sure whether it's all over America, but last month when I was out in California, it was there. 3 leading members of officials of the Presbyterian Church told me what they're doing. They're asking the ministers of their denomination to fine-tooth comb their congregations for men and women who have one or another of these technical skills that the government wants, or businessmen who can offer themselves to foreign business, or men who know something about social welfare and can go out for philanthropy as well as for the church. All these men will then find themselves a job. They will offer themselves to the government or elsewhere, and when they do so, the Presbyterian Church is going to commission them, send them out as a representative of that church, paid by our government or in some other way to help the world abroad. That's excellent as far as it goes. Indicates a brand new vision on the part of the church. And these 3 men who told me said, it looks as though we'd have more missionaries sent out like that, commissioned and paid for by business or by government than we have paid for by the church. That's good as far as it goes. Now I want to tell you from personal experience, and as well as from being all over that part of the world all the time nearly. I've been around the world this year, visited 21 countries, and I want to tell you that the world is wide open. There never was such a wide open door. The communists themselves have made it wide open to the kind of Christian who goes out with a skill the world needs. Tell you why. Those masses are now stirred up. And they had their heads down. They were hopeless. You had to sell the idea of progress to them. They didn't think there was anything they could do. Their own religions told them, lie still, submit. Changing anything your ancestors did is wrong. That's the way they used to think. They've changed their minds about that. Any of you who are wide readers know that the idea of progress is a new idea that has just been sold to the world. The idea of not changing was the old idea. And now, all over the world, these people are reaching up their hands to progress, to come up out of the hell of poverty they're in now, and destitution and hunger. And they're saying, who will take our hands? That's number one. It didn't used to be that way. When I started in with my missionary work, it was not that way. It's a phenomenon of the last 20 years, and especially the last 10 years, and especially the last 5 years. So new that we hardly know it's here. Now, the next thing that's new. These countries across here, the aristocracy, I don't see any of them here. I hate to say these things in front of them, but that little fringe of 5% didn't give a fig for those masses excepting to exploit them. Europe did the same thing. European nations went out there and didn't give a fig for them excepting to exploit them. But the European nations and those national, educated, rich rulers exploited them. Now they're frightened. And now they're no longer that way. They know they've got to do something for those people, and they're looking around frantically to do it. In my own business, I have the closest up proof of that. As I've told you, I think, some of you, I myself, as I travel from one country to the other, have been invited by governments to help them with their literacy. And I'll tell you why they ask us missionaries. 90% of them are illiterate. They want education not only for their children, but for themselves, and they want it in the next 5 years. If they don't get it right away or reach a good big start, they're going to blow up and throw up over their governments. Nehru will go, and Nasser will go, and the Shah of Iran will go, and all the others will go, unless they do something in 5 years, and they can't. Our way. Imagine building the schools, the colleges, the primary schools that we have in this country. Can't be done. But if they can adopt our cheap way, the missionaries' shoestring way of teaching, each one teach one at home without paying the teacher, everybody helping everybody else, it can be done. And so they're asking us to come. And I have myself been asked by 64 governments to come and show them how the missionaries, each one teach one. And as I do so, this is the point I want to get. I ask these people, why'd you ask a missionary to come here? For example, Afghanistan doesn't allow missionaries. But my wife and I, with missionary on our passport, were invited up there. We're given a prize by the king of Afghanistan. And I said to him, why did you invite us? And he told me the same thing 64 countries have. Our masses are dangerously restive and determined to better their condition. They want literacy and they want it right away, and you're the only people that have the answer. That's the reason I must tell you this, so that you'll know that I speak with authority. I know what I'm talking about when I say you have the widest open door if you go out there to help those governments with their dilemma. They're in a foxhole. They're in a terrible situation with their own people, and they're on their good behavior because they're frightened. And if we go out there and help them, the world's wide open for America. That means something to missions. The old type of missionary is going to have a hard time staying there. More and more of these nationalist governments are not going to let them have their visas to go back if they can't have some skill that those governments need. They're not interested, the Hindu isn't, the Muslim isn't, or the Buddhist isn't, in making them Christian. And so you can't go back. Some can and some cannot, unless you have some other skill. But if you have one of these skills that are named here, that the government of the United States wants because those other countries want it, if you had literacy, if you knew simple writing, they need to have so much written that's good. They need to be trained to do it. If you knew agriculture, if you knew engineering or building if you knew home economics or dietetics or child care, if you knew stenography and typewriting, it's very badly wanted now. They can't get nearly enough. Koinonia can't to supply the demand of the government of the United States just for secretaries. If you knew business administration and 100 other things, the mission boards could send them out. If we can only get an alert fast enough. Now, I'm glad to say some of the mission boards are way ahead of the others. You may be surprised, I was, to find out that the Southern Baptists on this particular point are out ahead of the rest, and they're working their heads off to find technicians in their own church to go out there in the mission field and meet the demand. And that's magnificent. The Lutherans, too, are out ahead of most of the other denominations, and they're working hard on this thing. I told you what the Presbyterians are doing. You might expect the Seventh-day Adventists to be on their toes, and they are, too. And there are some others. But on the whole, the mission boards have not yet awakened to the fact that these last few years, since 1950 especially, 49 is when China finally collapsed. And since then, the world is different. They don't know it yet. So what can you do about that? Well, maybe some of you can come. Go back to your church and educate your own congregation, if you can. And talk to your minister about it. And you can quote me all you want to. And say, we must send missionaries out. Let's examine our church. If you do so, what will you find? The National Council of Churches publishes an annual statement of the membership and the expenditures of the leading denominations of the United States. I don't have it here with me. Just by pure accident, I left it home, but I can quote it. I was perhaps just as well not to quote each denomination. You might blush. But I can quote what the total thing is. The average giving for foreign missions on the old basis before 1945, just about the same yet, excepting in these denominations I named, going up there. But the average giving is $1.50 a year. That means to say every second day we give a cent. Every second day we give 0. Now that we got by, we didn't get blown up anyhow, before 1945, 1950 on that basis, but we won't last any longer. We've got to entirely revolutionize our missionary program, and we've got to enormously increase it and offer missionaries who have these technical skills to these governments and cooperate with the governments. If we do so, it's going to be very, very easy to win people to Jesus Christ, including the leaders themselves. When you realize how Paul, what an influence he had over there in Rome while he was in a prison, right up into the emperor's palace, it's amazingly easy to go over there and win the friendship of the Shah or anybody. It's so much easier to see their big shots than it is our own. I was telling the other day, I was down here in Peru, and I went in and said, Lord, what shall I do about Peru? It's hard going. And he seemed to say, go over and talk to the president. So Sunday afternoon, I went over there and punched a button. And a valet came out and said, what do you want? And I handed him my card. I said, I'd like to see the president. And he said, in 5 minutes, he came out and said, the president is ready to see you. That's the way they are over there, much easier than they are here, to be seen if you go with something they want. So that's, you asked me what to do. Go back and examine your church. If you want to get a little ammunition, write to the pastor of the Park Street Church of Boston. He is the model for the United States. He has 125 missionaries in his church, costing $250,000 a year, and his overhead expenses are $80,000. There's no church equal to that in the United States. But Ockenga will be awfully glad to boast about it and send you information. So you can say to your church, let's get busy. This is the way it might be everywhere. And it might be everywhere, too. We got the money. And if you want to do something about it, instead of just hearing about it and sitting on the bleachers, if you want to get into this game and do something about it, then you may write to the Student Volunteer Movement, 156 Fifth Avenue, and ask them for a thing called Far Horizons. Don't get that mixed with CFO Clear Horizons. Far Horizons is just a catalog like this of the opportunities for missions in all the various denominations, what the central boards are asking for. And then there are a great many excellent things that perhaps you already know about. Koinonia is publishing this thing, A Man to Remember. And it tells the organizations that are trying to help around the world. And I recommend that you get it. You can get one about there for 25 cents. It's the best written thing for this of its kind, I believe there is, in the world. In the United States, telling what different organizations are carrying on programs around the whole wide world. You can read them over, and if one of them seems to you to be exactly what you want, then you can help it. Now, instead of my telling you about Koinonia or World Neighbors, I know you'll all be very glad if I invite Glenn and John Peters to say something about their organization. I could tell you why they exist. I'm very enthusiastic about them both, as well as about our own World Literacy Incorporated and our World Literacy Christian Literature. You perhaps know something about them. They exist for the purpose of meeting this demand of missions and for meeting the demand of governments. One of them works with missions, and the other one works with governments. And I'm
try to hasten. I recognize that this is a little irregular. This morning, at Dr. Laubach's request, I tried to tell you, I did tell you, why I personally am so tremendously concerned about peace. Of course, that is a concern, I'm sure, that rests equally heavy on all our hearts. Somebody was telling about a preacher who'd been in the State Department and later went into the ministry and carried over some of the habits of the State Department, and on his desk he has two baskets. One's marked sacred, and the other one is marked top secret. Well, I don't think there's anything more top secret than this matter of what do we do about making peace a reality in our day. And some of you may feel, as occasionally I do and did, when we recognize the tremendous issues that are involved, when we see the terrible import of the arms program as it now is and as it apparently will continue to be, and when we realize the tremendous scope of a billion little people now in turmoil, in revolution, as a matter of fact, a revolution of rising expectations, as it's been called, we may feel, well, that's overwhelming. Well, what can I do? I'm not equipped. With these particular disciplines that apparently are needed, I've got my responsibilities. I'm just one person. What can I do? Well, some of those things have been previously indicated, and I hope you'll take them to heart. For instance, our mission program. I was last week with Dr. Luther Gottwald, who is chairman of the Division of Foreign Missions for the National Council, and we were talking about this matter. Frankly, the church does not believe in missions. That's a terrible thing to say. But I say it because if anybody gave me the $2 or less for World Neighbors, if I went into a man's office and told him about World Neighbors, and he gave me $1.50, I would know that he did not believe in World Neighbors. He wanted merely to get me out of his office. And yet that's all we give for missions, this tremendous job, the only answer. We're not going to solve the problem of peace by bigger bombs, and yet this year you're going to pay between $400 and $500 for the arms program. But that's merely to repel or resist aggression. The job's got to be done by somebody with the love of Christ in his heart. But do we believe it? I mean, are we serious about it? We say these things. I go to a conference and hear it repeated. And then I hear the preachers get together and say, how can we cut our world service giving? We've got a building program. We got to get... pardon me, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit wrought up. I just don't believe we believe it. Now, I think there are some serious things there. For one thing, I don't think missions has sold its story. It hasn't told adequately enough what it's doing. Another thing, I think it has been a little too slow to wake up to the tremendous changes that are necessary and that Dr. Laubach has indicated in its approach, in what it has to offer, in the way it goes about it. The terrible inhibiting factor of denominationalism. And I'm a Methodist and proud of it. Well, maybe I should have. Did I say that wrong? I'm happy to be a Methodist. But let me say this. Suppose I were here in this country and some very eloquent and consecrated Buddhist were finally persuade me that Buddhism had something to offer me. And I would say to him, well, all right, I believe I'll be a Buddhist. Well, he says, it's not quite that easy. Now, what kind of a Buddhist do you want to be? A Seventh-day Buddhist, a Reformed Buddhist, a Southern Buddhist, a Northern Buddhist? He said, we got 176 varieties. Well, I'd say, I just think I'll be satisfied with what I got. That's too big and complicated a job. World Neighbors is working with 14 different denominational organizations, most of them interdenominational. The United Church of South India, North India, United Church of Christ in the Philippines. We're tremendously thrilled at our privilege to work in such relationships. But believe me, the church itself has got to do what it requires of its members, that it shakes off its selfishness, its institutional concern, and goes to the world with nothing but the love of Christ. No strings attached. In India, a very wonderful Hindu said to me, I resent your missions for the same reason I resent any other type of imperialism. You're not willing to share the love of Christ with us. You've got to capture us. You've got to label us. You've got to number us. And I'm afraid too frequently, he was right. Now, we don't give to missions, you know. Somebody says, what happened to all that money we gave to missions? All what money? Last year, we paid almost identically the same amount in America to feed our parakeets. I'm leaving out the canaries. Just to feed our parakeets. $60 million we paid to feed parakeets last year, which is just about what the churches gave for missions. We fed our dogs 10 times as much as we put into spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world. We just don't believe it. That's what I'm saying. And I don't believe it can be denied. All right, now, having said that, I came back from the war wondering, isn't there something somebody can do that would make a difference? I promised God in a foxhole if I got out, I'd do whatever I could. But I finally decided, what can you do? What can one individual, a handful, a church, a group, just people, what can we do that would make any difference? Isn't this something that has to be done by the world, by the United Nations, by parliaments, by governments, by congresses? And finally I decided it was. That what I'd promised God in a foxhole was just something you say in a foxhole, that he knew, surely, that in the cold light of the morning after you couldn't redeem a promise like that. And so, being a Methodist preacher, well, another thing, too. I have a very wonderful family, my wife and son. Some of you know my Kay, and she's the far the better 3/4 of our particular combination. And she loves and knows God, and God had put onto her heart something I wasn't even aware of, because I came back and was ready to settle for the fact that you just can't do anything, really. Another thing, too, I'd traveled all I wanted to travel. I promised my family and myself I was going to stay put. That's not as easy as it sounds for a Methodist preacher. Some of our congregations are warm of heart and generous, and after a while glad to share us with somebody else. And occasionally a bishop has an idea or two. In fact, they say Methodist preachers play chess just so they can move the bishop around. It's the only chance they've got. Well, anyhow, I decided that I would fix that up. So I'm fortunate. I have a degree from Yale, and using that, I bulldozed my way into a school, a university, in the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Oklahoma City University. But I hadn't really figured it all out. One day the bishop called me anyhow, and he says, the pastor down at St. Luke's is ill, and it's almost 6 months to conference. I want you to go down and preach there on Sunday morning. So I did. One Thursday morning, April 21st, 1951, I was listening, as I know many of you were, to the radio. MacArthur was just back giving his report to the joint houses of Congress. I'd served under the general abroad. I hadn't liked some of the things he did. He didn't seem to bother him much. I had liked other things that he did, and I'd been greatly impressed by his administration of Japan. So I was listening. Now, he said, of course, he was defending to some degree his actions in Korea. But here's what he said that struck me to the heart. He said the people of Asia found their opportunity in the war just past to throw off the shackles of colonialism, and now, he said, they seek a new and better way of life. They want to be understood. They want guidance. They want the right food in their stomachs. They want a little better clothing on their backs. They want a little firmer roof over their heads. He said, this is the direction of Asian progress, and it may not be stopped. And I knew that was deeply true. I had been privileged to be with Frank Laubach. I'd read his literature. I'd heard him preach as only he can. For 25 years, he'd been going up and down this country, telling us to wake up or blow up, as he finally put it in his book. So I threw away my sermon, and I got into the pulpit that Sunday morning with a handful of notes and preached a sermon called Let's Deal with Basic Issues. The world's hungry. The average salary in China for that year was $27 a year. In some areas, it was even less. Half the world gets less than $50 a year. And yet we just are not aware of their need, the depth of their poverty, of the height of their hope, of their determination to move forward, Dr. Laubach has said. I won't go over that sermon. I won't try to repeat what Frank Laubach has so adequately told you. But at any rate, at the end of that sermon, nobody came up and said, we enjoyed your sermon. You know, I'm not trying to inhibit you. I mean, after all, the minister parks at the door. You've got to get by. You've got to say something. And that's very well, and frequently you mean it, I know. But that Sunday, nobody did. They came up. If they came up, they said, we've got to do something. We've got to do something. And the men met the next night and said, we'll back you 100% in what you want to do. What do you want to do? That's an unusual experience for a preacher. You know, and we tell them, somebody ought to do something. That's right. What is it? So they said, all right, here's some money and some luggage. They seen my luggage, and they send me off to New York and Washington. They said, go ask some people. If you don't know the answers, ask somebody that does and come back and tell us. Well, I went up to the Committee on World Literacy. Dr. Laubach wasn't in, but Alfred Moore was. I got Douglas Foreman of the Medical Council, got John Reisner and Ira Mumaw of Agricultural Missions. I said, would you men be a coordinating committee? Because here's what we want to do, we think. Oh, in the meantime, I talked to a lot of people. Warren Austin, out to UN, down to Point 4, mission boards, later in Washington to Walter Judd and others. And I said, here's what I think we want to do. We want to put a little team together who will go out as a team, not just as Americans, but as Americans plus nationals of that country, all of whom love God and love people, and who have an adequate training, a discipline, not just a good intention, but some real competence in literacy, in public health, in village industries, in agriculture, and put them out there not to live on a missionary compound, not to live in a city and go slumming in the villages, but in the villages, and see what happens. Just see what happens. They're not going to be the representatives of the Methodist Church, because already our fellows have said, now look, if this is going to be any good, it's got to be bigger than just a handful of us Methodists. So we invited the men from all over the city through the Council of Churches. They'd met one hot August day and laid down $13,000 on the table. What can you do with this? We didn't know for sure. But here's what, with that kind of guidance, we did. That first year, we got a little team together, sent over a public health nurse and an agriculturalist. We got in touch with Jack DeValois down at Kotpati, little agricultural institute 70 miles west of Madras, in a communist-threatened, famine-stricken area, because the monsoons had failed for about 5 years. They said, now, if you want to be sure you make a success, don't go down there. But if you want to go where the need is deep, go down there. I didn't know how deep that need was until a few months later I went over, because we had trouble trying to explain what we were about. Who were we? Well, we were just people, really. And at first, you know, I haven't got time to tell you. We tried to get this under the National Council. The council said, well, now we got so many things now. When you're big enough, come back. By the time we got big enough, We had Southern Baptists and let's see, some Pentecostals and some Unitarian or two and so on. And they didn't want to be under the National Council, and the National Council really didn't want them anymore. And so we just went out. People said, "Who are you?" We're just people. Love God and love people, but just us. Will you trust us? So now, as Dr. Laubach told you, last September I was invited with a considerable number of others to a meeting at the White House, and the president, with all the urgency and earnestness of his soul, told us, he said, the time is at hand when people have got to lead governments, have got to evade governments if necessary, to get together and build these bridges of understanding that governments simply cannot build. The Secretary of State told us, he said, we'll do the wisest thing we know, but that thing, however wise, will not succeed unless the atmosphere, a friendly atmosphere, has been created, and that can only be created by people, just people, working with people. So instead of feeling, now, what can just people do, let me tell you there is something that just people, with the love of Jesus Christ in their hearts, can do that governments or institutions, nobody else can do. At any rate, we started, got this little team going. At the end of the year, we had 13 people in 20 villages. Today, we've got 170 people out in over 1,500 villages in India, and a little project closing up. We'll have to close it, not so much because of the trouble, it's because by this time, we've taught them everything we know to teach, and they're standing on their own feet. Up at a little center at El Fadra, about 125 miles up the Nile from Cairo. We're working with a group of United Presbyterians. But, and a new program beginning in the Philippines that is absolutely terrific. We worked it out with President McSysai, with General Romulo, with old friends of Dr. Laubach. It's amazing to see, as I do discover wherever we go, the footprints of this man and the love that is engendered when they know you know him. And let me tell you, let me say again, as he did, there are no doors closed to this kind of thing. We stopped in the State Department, for instance, before the last trip. And they told us, they said, now, you're liable to have some trouble when you get over to Indonesia and perhaps in Burma because they'd thrown out some of our governmental programs. We didn't, not at all. At first, they found it a little difficult to understand who you are. You're not with the government? No. You're not a missionary? Well, not exactly. Well, what are you? You got to be fish, fowl, or beast. You got to be something. But once they believe that honestly you are just what you say you are, just somebody who loves God, who loves people, who realizes that this is a world we've got to build together if it's going to stand. The door's open. Everything falls before you. And I don't mean just Christians. I'm talking about Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus. Sure, they know you're a Christian. And they're amazed in some instances that you're that kind of a Christian. But you're welcomed if you'll come in with them. Let me explain something that may be a little difficult. Dr. Laubach, you know G. Ramachandran down at Gandhigram. He told me one day, we're working with some Gandhians down there, he said, how do you feel working with me, with us, a Hindu? Well, he said, I'm a Hindu, you're a Christian. Well, I said, Mr. Ramachandran, if you in your search have found anything of truth and beauty and value in God, we rejoice with you. And perhaps we could profit if you were shared with us. If in turn, we in our search, through Christ, have found anything of truth and beauty and value in God, we stand ready to share it with you if you like. Meanwhile, recognizing that we're sons of the same Heavenly Father, here's a task that needs to be done. Children hungry, people in need, illiterates wanting to learn. Let's get at it. He wept. He said, that's sharing like I've heard about but never thought I'd see. Will you pray for me? I prayed for him. I asked him, as a matter of fact, to pray for me. He said this. He said, the heart of India is open to Christ. Gandhi did that. But he said, if you're coming to convert us, we will resist and resent you. I thought, here's a man that talks out of both sides of his mouth. But he went on to say, I came to realize what they understand by that word. It's a part to many of them of that package of superiority which the white man seems to inevitably carry. That I'm all right and you're all wrong, and you got to take everything I know and have got and throw away everything you know and have got. And they don't like it, and we wouldn't like it. He said, if you're coming, however, to offer us fulfillment, we'll receive you with open arms. Jesus, in the context of Judaism, said, I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. It's going to take more to fulfill, and that's the deepest hunger in all the world. There are great hungers in the world, the hunger for food, the hunger for freedom, the hunger for fellowship. This hunger for fulfillment is the deepest. Have we got what it takes to offer this to the world? It's going to mean a heart searching, a deepening of our roots, a consecration of our lives, the infusion of the Spirit of God on all our life and works. But if we've got it, we can go, and we don't need to go in a combative spirit. We just play great music. You don't have to argue it. Just play it. God showed forth his love through the gift of his Son. I don't know any other way to show forth his Son than through the gift of my love. And I know it will win its way. Let me just tell you, and I must hasten, and I do, to a close. I'd like to tell you about all these projects we've got, for each of them has a tremendous story. We're using Dr. Laubach's literacy method in nearly all. We've organized 84 youth clubs, and they're going, it's one of the most wonderful experiences. Some of them are all girls, and as far as I know, they're the only rural girls clubs in all of India. The first thing they have to do is to learn to read. Second thing is to teach somebody else to read. When enough of them learn to read, and they have built a library, I'm getting a little bit ahead of my story. Let me back up and tell you about a couple of projects. First, let me show you why this thing will win over communism, and I know it. We heard about a very wonderful couple down in South India. His name is Joseph John and his wife Ranjithan. They're Indians. He's highly educated. He has a college degree and a seminary degree. His wife is a doctor. Like Albert Schweitzer, they decided one day they wanted to go where to minister to the deepest need they knew. The deepest need they knew was in a little valley, where a kind of a rural skid row, where over 1,000 landless laborers had drifted, many of them with leprosy, to eke out a living if they could, to die if they must. They went up there, not to preach, but to dig wells. He started in digging wells. He got water on the land. He got these landless laborers onto that land. He let them begin to have an increasing share in the crops until now they became their own men. He started a literacy program. He started a crafts program. He ran out of resources. He heard about us about the same time we heard about them. We got together. We've been working with them now for over 2 years. They're wonderful people. I was out there last year in that valley. But about the time we went in, the communists sent a young man and his wife up from Mathura. His name was Punasamy. And Punasamy went up to see what he could do, for this was the state of Andhra, and the communists fully expected to take Andhra. So he went to work, and he organized a communist cell. And then his wife got sick. And Joseph said, if you'll bring your, we know why you're here, we know what you think of us, we know what you're trying to do. Your wife's sick, however, and my wife's a doctor. If you'll bring her down to our dispensary, and we treat over 200 lepers a week in that dispensary right now. If you'll bring her down to our dispensary, we'll see if we can't help her. He brought her down, and while she was getting well, this young communist, Punasamy, went out into the valley and saw what we were doing. We put some diesel pumps on these wells. We've dug some more wells. We've enlarged the crafts program. We built another dispensary. We've got another young couple in there to help them in their medical program. He saw all this going on. He said, why, this is something communism told us would never happen until we came into power. What makes you do this? And then he told him about Jesus. And Punasamy said, could I be that kind of a person? And Joseph said, of course you can. And he told him more, and they got on their knees, and he prayed this man through to Christ. And when I was out, and Punasamy didn't want to go to work for Rural Neighbors. And I would have hired him. I'm sure. But Joseph said, not so fast. You won 14 of our best young men to communism. Now, you can't just turn around and start working for us. Win them back. So when I was out there last year, he had won 9 of them back. He still had 5 to go. There'd been 2 attempts on his life. He'd written 2 plays on his disillusionment with communism. One of them had been published by the National Christian Council. I sat up most of the night trying to look at it. I couldn't understand it, and it runs all night long, you know, the play. I fell over about 1:30, but they said it's terrific. But I said to Joseph, look, let's don't hold this man off any longer. Let's hire him. And he's in charge of our literacy program out there now, Dr. Laubach. We pay him $32.50 a month, which is a good salary for that area. He's a highly literate and very able young man. You see, I know this thing. If demonstrated, Well, stop communism cold, as Dr. Laubach has said. One other project. I'd like to tell you about all of them. We're in a 300-village project at Allahabad. It costs us $30,000 a year. Figures out $100 a village. Figures 35 cents a person per year to teach a man how to read, to teach his wife how to take care of their children, teach them a little bit about home economics and sanitation, to encourage them in the conviction that we've got the answer wrapped up in us, which once released and redeemed can give us whatever it is we may need to build India. But I can't tell you about them all. I'll just tell you about a little village called Mandavati. We're in a loan program down in South India. We even charge interest, 6%. But you see, they've been paying interest that went up to 300%. And the reason we're loaning money, in spite of the fact, lending money, I don't know, my syntax at that point's a little uncertain. But they told us if you lend money to the nationals, you'll never get it back, because they think every American is a millionaire. But we were working through the United Church of South India, Bishop Newbegin and others, and they said, we're sure it'll be all right. So we started a loan program not to exceed $200 a village. Now, the reason we loaned money to the villages was because this is South India. The monsoons had failed. They sold their spinning wheels, their weaving frames, their agricultural implements. They sold their children. I was down there at the time in '52, Dr. Laubach. I've been up with Dr. Laubach, Marrera, and Kazgans that year, a little bit earlier. And down there I saw children on little pipe stem legs getting that much gruel. The missionary was compounding out of Meals for Millions and other materials. All they were going to get that day, that little bit they got while I was watching, was their total day's intake. And in many instances, it was more than their parents were getting. So the need was tremendous, and they were selling their children for a handful of rice if anybody could feed the kids. Well, when the rains came, they didn't have anything to build back with. So we went in there with a loan program to help them buy the limited things they needed to build again. And life is on a pretty much of a communal basis in these villages. They were buying, every village did pretty much the same sort of thing. And so we've been going. It was the oven month. And we've been going all day long from 4:45. It was 7 o'clock that evening, and I was dead tired. In fact, all I was thinking about was the bed I was going to lie in 30 miles away when and if we ever got there. And so I said to the interpreter, we've been looking at herds of goats and some new equipment, weaving and spinning and agricultural implements and some of the things the youngsters had done, and compost pits that they'd built. You see, we don't give anything away in this program. We take hybrid seed and we trade it for an equal amount of poor seed. We take better roosters in, trade them for a couple of their poor roosters. See, our chickens lay 200 eggs a year sometimes. Theirs lay about 40. So we're trying to improve the breed. But we don't give it away. We sell a little plow made for $3.25. Or, yeah, I think it's what we get for it. Up at Allahabad, we sell it for what it costs. Now, that's something to sell it to somebody who's going to make about $36 that year. But you see, the main thing we're after is to help this little man keep his self-respect. We don't want to reduce him to the feeling that he's an object of our charity. We're trying to create a relationship there that's not donor to recipient, not even teacher to pupil, but partner to partner, neighbor to neighbor, brother to brother. And I think really that's the success, the reason for whatever major success we've had. We've been going all that day, however, I'll hasten to a conclusion. There's so much I want to say, and I mustn't. And finally I said, look, we just got to go. I'm dead. I just can't go anymore. They said, well, you've got to go to Mandavati. You just can't leave here without going out to Mandavati. Well, I said, what's Mandavati? Where is Mandavati? Never heard of it. Well, it's a little village 7 miles off the highway out here. It's not on the map, but it's a little group of tanners. Used to be outcasts. And you loaned them $125, $120. And they bought new hides and new equipment. And you sent a couple of instructors out there to help them do a better job. And they're so thrilled with what they've done and what you did. And one of your men's out there, been there all day, and they've been waiting for you all day, and you just can't let them down. So I said, well, all right. And we got in the Jeep, and off we went. We ran out of road, and I thought we were lost. And suddenly, though, in the thick darkness, I saw a handful of candles. And as the Jeep drew near, about 280 people came running out into the light. They came with little garlands of flowers. They threw around our necks. They got on their knees. They tried to kiss our hands. I felt terrible. We loaned them $120. We hadn't given them a cent. They were paying it back. They treated us like we were God. They took us around, showed us these hides, lifted them out of the vats. Oh, they were so proud of them. I don't know much about hides. And we hadn't had supper yet, which is probably a good thing. But, I mean, I've got a degree in historical theology, but I'm trying to learn about fertilizers and insecticides and hides. And they showed them, we looked at all of them, and finally I said, no, we've just got to go, just got to go. Well, they said, there's one more thing. If you just do one more thing. I said, what's that? They want you to lay the cornerstone of the new library. Well, I said, what is, I mean, you know, a new library, you think about something, brick, steel, and here we were in a handful of thatched roof, mud wall huts in an area usually 100% illiterate. I said, can any of these people read? They said, yes, 3 of them can read. They learned to read in a literacy program that you carried on. We used Dr. Laubach's method. You carried on about 2 months ago in a village 12 miles from here. They went down, they stayed with it, they learned to read. And they've come back on fire to teach this village to read. But they understand that you don't give books until they've built a library. And that's true, we don't. Because the ants get them faster than the people sometimes. And we get these people to learn to read, some of them, teach somebody else to read, appoint one of their number a librarian, build a library, little community center. Usually it's done by a youth club, but this was a little different. And then we give them a library. So they said they want to build this library. I want you to lay the cornerstone. So I went around, sure enough, here was a cleared area, a little pile of mortar and 3 mud bricks. And I'm not too sure of my bricklaying technique, but I got on my knees and I did my best to put those 3 mud bricks together to look like a cornerstone. And while I was there, they were singing and praying and rejoicing, and all of a sudden it just hit me. This wasn't an outcast village on nobody's map. These little candles were the hearts and minds of 1.5 billion little people out in Africa, out in Asia, out in the Middle East. Nobody's been there with any light. They're waiting for somebody to come and light those candles. And we can go, as Dr. Laubach has indicated. We can go now, like almost we never have been able to go before. Particularly, I think, if we'll go stripping ourselves of any pride of position or place or culture or race. Just go with the love of God. If we'll go, we can light those candles. We can send people, if we can't go. We can send our sons, let's say, and our daughters to love and be loved, to serve and be served, to build the millennium. Or we cannot do it. We can do just what we've been doing. We can say, don't bother me. Taxes are coming. The kids need the tonsils out. I've got to have a new car to keep up with the Joneses. And we won't go. We'll feed our parakeets this year. And if we don't go, let me tell you this. There'll be somebody there to light, not a light, but a fire. And once they've convinced those little people that we don't care, that they waited too long, they'll accept that fire. And then we'll send our sons when it's too late. We'll do just what we did in World War II. Congo asked us long before that. He said, send us 1,000 of your sons as missionaries, or you'll have to send 10,000 of them as soldiers. He underestimated it. We never did send 1,000. We haven't yet. We left 34,000 boys in Korea alone. We're going to do it, or we're not going to do it. This is the chance of a lifetime, the chance of history. We're the most privileged generation in all history, unless we throw that privilege away. We've got the world in our hands, in God's hands, if we go with him to them. If we don't go, we'll go anyhow, you see. You don't really have a choice. You just can determine the consequences. Why don't we do what God wants us to do? Thank you so much. Now, about world neighbors, there's some literature on the table out there. And we'd be glad to have you help us do this job. It's not as a substitute for any of these others. It's an additional thing. It's a second mile. It's a sacrifice. My boy's in uniform right now. When he is called to go, they won't say, we want you to go as far as you'd like. He'll have to go as far as he can go. Can we just demand that heroism and that sacrifice just of our youngsters? What about us? There is this second mile. I invite you to take it. And the envelope's in there. It doesn't have any address on it. The folder does, incidentally, but the envelope doesn't. If you're interested in becoming a member of World Neighbors, because there's no organization as such, it's just us, just you and me. And that's what makes all the difference overseas, when they know it's just people. If you want to do this, in addition to what you're doing through the church and for Koinonia or literacy, this has got to be a second and third mile even, if you want to and will. I'd like for you to write the name on that envelope of J. Max Cruwell, because Max Cruwell has agreed to be our chairman in this Kansas City area. And one of these days we hope to have here what we have now in about 50 other American communities.